Welcome back to my TT Wine Explorer podcast. I'm Tanya Tomaszewska. Today's episode is about building a brand. Specifically, it's about building the brand of a new winery from its inception. Of course, a winery is about its wine and its grapes and its place. But it's also about story. The story and experience which that winery is offering to consumers. I can't think of a better person to speak with about brand building than Ian MacDonald. Based in British Columbia's Okanagan Valley, Ian was the founder of Liquidity Wines, which opened in about 2012. For those who don't know it, Liquidity makes premium wines and is located in a wine subregion called Okanagan Falls. It's a spectacular property which integrates jaw-dropping vineyard vistas and lake views, has a sleek tasting room, modern bistro, and a variety of artworks installed around the property. Now, before opening Liquidity, Ian had no experience in the wine industry whatsoever, as far as I'm aware. But he had a lot of experience in marketing and building extremely successful brands in other sectors. Branding is about focusing on the consumer, and Ian really knows how to do that well. I vividly recall the first time I met Ian. I was at a winery tasting event here in Vancouver. The kind of event where a number of wineries set up tables to which us tasters can walk up for some pours and a chat. Ian was representing Liquidity at his table. Down to earth and personable, he poured samples and explained the Liquidity story to me in a really relaxed way. We had a lot of laughs. And I saw this scene repeated numerous times after that when I went to visit the Liquidity property. Ian in the tasting room, working amongst the team which he had assembled, pouring wine at the tasting bar and chatting with visitors, asking where they'd come from, what they'd like to taste. And this is what it's all about, connection and story. I hope that you enjoy my discussion with Ian MacDonald today. Let's fly. Hi, Ian. Welcome to the TT Wine Explorer podcast. So thank you so much for joining as my guest today.
Thank you so much, Tanya. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So in today's episode, I'd like to use Liquidity Wines as a case study for brand building in the winery space. And not just any brand, a brand which makes premium wines and offers a world-class property for wine lovers and everyday consumers to visit, a wine travel destination. But before we get into the story about how Liquidity came into being and your vision which built it, I thought we could chat a little bit about your background in marketing and brand building and how this all started for you. And before we get into that, I'm just going to make a note to the audience to refer them to a podcast called Meet Me in the Kitchen, which is put out by Little Kitchen Academy, which an initiative you're also involved in. And March 15th, 2023 episode has a really lengthy expose on you, I would say, with your discussion about your background. So I'll just refer to the audience to that. But Ian, back to you. So in a quick snapshot, can you share a bit about your story in terms of how you developed your expertise in marketing and creating brands? What was your first job? How did you learn to do this?
Yeah, I think that any expertise that I have in marketing kind of started organically without really knowing what marketing was or having studied it in any way. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that even as a young man at the age of 14, I was already working full-time after school, managing the front desk at the local YMCA in my town. And so you're interacting with the public, you're communicating, you're answering questions, signing up people for things, explaining all the different programs that are available to them, and then handling the money and the processing of all that. I think marketing at the end of the day is really about communicating with people. And I think that those early jobs that I had really gave me a bit of a introduction education about how best to interact with people. And so I ended up kind of having more of a creative spark and a tremendous amount of energy around this whole concept of marketing. And everything I know in marketing, I've just learned from being on the job. And it's been a long time and through a lot of companies, a lot of very successful companies that I worked for or companies that I started myself. And always marketing and the brand has been forefront in the whole process.
So it sounds like a mix of getting out there in the world in real life and intuition and passion and a combination of all those things and, a natural knack, for lack of better words. I know from your after Salomon, you went and had a very successful initiative and endeavor and enterprise related to Olympics and apparel. maybe if you could just quickly touch on that before we jump into the winery scene. What gap did you see in the market? What did you create there in that space for people who don't know?
My Olympic involvement started from my days with a company called Sun Ice. It was an apparel company, ski outerwear primarily in the beginning, that was based out of Calgary, Alberta. And they were a fledgling company, basically a basement startup kind of a thing. I was leaving Solomon because I wanted to go into other things. They wanted me to move on to VP of sales. And I really loved marketing and I wanted to stay with it. And these people called me that owned it out of Sun Ice and said, we have a ski wear company. We want to be successful. We hear you're a marketing and sales and management guy. Can you come and help us? And I thought about it and said, nothing's ever been done at that point in time. This is a long time ago, relative to really the doing a lot of marketing with soft goods. It just didn't happen then. It's a big thing today, but we're talking now, this is 1983. Jumped in there and applied a lot of things I had learned from hard goods into soft goods. And my gosh, it became a phenomenon. It was just this thing just blew up all across Canada and throughout the United States and was actually starting to trend globally. But part of what happened with that, I managed to take the company in as the clothing sponsor of the Games for Calgary 1988 Winter Olympics. And that's a whole other story. 24 years, 13 consecutive Olympics, all over the world, looking after millions of people and multi-millions of uniforms pieces that were put together. Finally wrapped it up in London 2012 so that I could focus all my energy on liquidity at that point in time. So now we circle back to liquidity.
So that's an Olympian effort on your part. Wow. So that's a lot. Those are a lot of experiences over a number of years over which you developed and created a lot of expertise and a lot of brands. And as you just mentioned, you wrapped your Olympic adventure and jumped into the world of wine. You'd never been involved in the wine industry, I don't think. And then you built a winery. So what prompted the start of Liquidity? How did you think, what prompted that, and how or in which ways did you think your experience and expertise from these earlier initiatives, endeavors and other sectors could be translated or used effectively in the wine industry space?
In several of the Olympics that I was involved in, there were wine sponsors, in Italy and in Australia, Greece, a lot of the different countries that we're participating in. And so I got really familiar with those companies and their products and seeing some of their wine regions because of my Olympic involvement. And it really kind of it took a hold on me. And again, this is being, this kind of naive outside perspective on things. And I traveled to New Zealand after the games in Sydney and fell in love with that place. And in those days, land in New Zealand was very cheap, not like today. And I kind of saw a couple of spots that I loved and considered making an offer to buy some land and maybe get into the wine business. But then, realized I still had, it was going to be too far from anywhere to run the Olympic business. And kind of had shared that story with a lot of my friends and put it in the back of my mind. And then circle around to 2000 and where are we now? 2006, I guess it was, that a couple of friends of mine that I knew from Canada here had said there was a property. They'd been looking at some properties in the Okanagan Valley, and I really wasn't that familiar with the Okanagan Valley in all my travels, and wanted to look at buying a winery here. So I looked at a few things, and then finally they got some calls back. World started changing in 2007, then finally in 2008, the economic upheaval. And they said there was this particular property that was insolvent. And they said, maybe we should have a look at it. Maybe we should just put a number in an envelope and you hand it into the judge and they open the envelope. And if you got the biggest number, suddenly you're the owner of a vineyard, in which it was the case. So we saw this vineyard. It looked like a vineyard to us. Didn't realize that the problems that were there because we just didn't have that expertise. And we just for a lark, threw a number in an envelope and gave it to the judge, and
you won.
Congratulations, you own this 5 acres of land in Okanagan Falls. And shrewdly, my partner said, great, we own this thing. We're going back to our day jobs. You're the guy that likes design and marketing and branding. So there you go. Have fun. Mm-hmm. So that was it. So I went to this piece of property, and you've seen it. And really the raw material was there. I mean, it's a spectacular location. The views are world class. But nobody had ever heard of Okanagan Falls in those days. In fact, it wasn't even on most maps. It wasn't even on any of the tourist maps. You could not find Okanagan Falls if you wanted to. And so I saw there was a big challenge ahead. The property needed to be completely redeveloped. We had to build all the infrastructure, all the buildings, put in the power, put in the water, put in the septic, put in basically everything. And in looking at the plan for this thing, I said, we're going to have to do something here that's a little different than what I had seen in the Okanagan Valley. I had seen certain things in other areas. I'd seen some really unique offerings of some wineries in Australia and New Zealand, various parts of the world. And without having sort of the research later on kind of verified what my thinking was. But in the day I was going, I think what's missing here is creating a destination.
Right.
And I thought if we were going to get people to come to Okanagan Falls, Liquidity was going to have to become a destination. And everybody thought I was crazy. How do you make a destination out of a piece of land in Okanagan Falls? But, I think that I'd seen, at least for me, that in a lot of places that I'd really enjoyed, it wasn't so much about just tasting the wines. And I felt that the consumer was looking typically for a lot more than that. And in talking to people looking around, it really became down to the destination being, a spectacular setting, having great food, and that really the wine tasting was important, but it certainly wasn't even in the top 3. They just wanted to get out there and enjoy themselves. And the wine pulls people together on that, and it's kind of this fun thing to do together. But you've been there, Tania. You could only taste so much wine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would say, getting to the point, I suppose, about the purpose or the mission or the market gap, which you saw in the context of the Okanagan wine scene and what Liquidity would offer to that market. I think you've spot on to what you identified as a gap in the market. And like you, I mean, I'd spent a lot of time in Australia. I lived there for many years. I traveled in wine country there and in New Zealand and a lot of other world regions where wine is about an integrated wine experience. Like you said, it's creating a destination for people to go and unplug and be in the place. And, it seems to me that was that was part of the story and the brand of what was to become Liquidity. So just on that, everything isn't a name. Why did you choose the name Liquidity? What were you seeking to convey or evoke with that name?
Well, you put a lot of names down, and then you try and get a domain or register a name in this day and age, and it's you can throw out most of them. Liquidity ended up on the list just because I thought, it's a really engaging word. If you're in the finance world, you know what liquidity is, and you kind of can smile about it because, winery,
the banking lawyer in me loves it.
Yeah. I mean, wineries aren't known for their liquidity. And if you're just a day-to-day person, you know the word, you probably don't use it that often. And therefore, it's kind of an engaging thing. It's this word that you kind of know about. You maybe can't describe it 100%, but it gives you a sense of feeling. And so I wanted to combine liquidity with the fact that there's liquid in the bottle, obviously. Mm-hmm. And then also that the view was featured water, the lakes in the distance. And then I made sure that there were water features around the property. So in a sense, there was that connection of liquidity and the whole thing. But somehow it was a word that people didn't forget. And when I looked around in the valley, there was so many wineries that had either creek in it or gully in it or mountain in it or something. And to me, that's, as a marketing thing, that's very confusing for people. You want to find something they can identify, connect with, and remember. If there's no brand retention, no name retention, then you really haven't served yourself properly or the customer.
So kudos, because I think that translated for many clearly with how Liquidity became a destination in the Okanagan Valley and for travelers beyond. I know, and I've seen publications with pictures and stories about visiting Canada's wine region, and Liquidity is front and center in that. So congratulations. I thought we'd move on beyond the name and into the product. And the team. So let's get into the components of building the business and the brand. So behind every name, and there's a product and there's the team. And one of the things which I admire about your approach is your emphasis on team. I remember going back to some of our earliest conversations, you were stressing the importance of assembling a really top-notch team and players around you. And so given that you had no direct previous experience in running a winery or starting a winery, how did you go about doing this in the context of Liquidity? What kind of team players or members were you looking for? A lot of founders or owners, they're not always into letting go. It can be very hard for people to do that, especially when you're starting. So how was that part of the process for you, coming into an area that you hadn't worked in before and finding the people to implement this vision with you?
I think part of it is having to let go of your ego in these situations. For a lot of people, the investment in the wine business is kind of a culmination of ego and passion. You did something, you made a lot of money, and then part of your bucket list, let's get a winery. And certainly our group was part of that, right? We didn't have any background in it, and we made there's a lot of mistakes along the way and a steep learning curve to get to where we finally got to. But first and foremost was creating a vision, of what it is that we wanted to accomplish. And mine's the creative side, build the program team. So I designed the whole property from the ground up, that it would be this experience every inch of the property as you went through it, as you've been there. I mean, long winding road, water features, all the landscaping, the giant sculpture parks, the buildings and everything else. So you come to the building and it's basically like a camera lens. You start from the front door and it's the first time you see this massive vista as you look all the way through the building, and people just like gobsmacked, what is this place? And you walk inside and you've got this farm to table cooking going on in a very, very intimate, cozy setting. You've got walls lined with, art everywhere, sculptures. I mean, it really took people out of what they were doing. So that was my job, to build and create this whole environment. And part of the vision from that then was we wanted to be, one of the top boutique brands in the country. And I wanted our restaurant to be, despite the fact we're in the middle of nowhere, one of the most recognized and well-known restaurants in the country. And I wanted our wines to be the best representation they could be of our terroir, of our climate in the Okanagan Valley. And to do that, we had to first think about it a lot and talk to a lot of people. And it boiled down to the fact that we should make our focus on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. This cool climate viticulture that would allow us to create the best that these wines can be. The long, hot days and the cool nights, because of the northern latitudes and the altitudes and everything else, the elevations that we're dealing with, would allow you to have that natural acidity, natural flavor locked into the wines. And so we focused on that. And a lot of other places in the Okanagan Valley are all over the map. They're planting everything, making everything. So we've drilled down and focused so that the team knew exactly what it is that we were all about. So then explaining all that, we hired people into the food side of the business, or into the viticultural side of the business, or into the winemaking side of the business, or into the management operations side of things, but a very, very clear structure and vision of what we want to do. And I would say to each one of the managers in each one of these silos of the business, what are the tools that you're going to need to be successful for your part of the business, so that as a group, as a team, we can reach these lofty goals? And we all got excited about it, and we all thought about it. Now, in the beginning, did we get all the right hires? No, because I think in some cases that people weren't ready for it or didn't believe in what we could do. But as we started to get some traction, we got more and more talent that really wanted to join the team and be part of it, to the point where after about 3 or 4 years, we had this A-team put together. Some brilliant people, great people with all kinds of background, all kinds of education, who just fell in love with Liquidity and what we were trying to accomplish. And what happened? Well, we became, it was really interesting, because when we first opened, we'd have nobody coming through our gates, coming up to the wine, because even though I'm a marketing guy, I didn't want to advertise. I wanted our growth to be organic. I wanted people to experience it and share it on social media, talk to their friends about it, or want to bring their friends to experience this thing. And then suddenly, within a couple of years, we had then top 100 restaurants in Canada. And then also my other passion is art. And the place was filled with art all the time, and great shows that we'd bring in from artists from around the world, and exhibits, and we'd have lectures with famous visiting artists. We had just all kinds of stuff to kind of bring art into the world of wine here and into the experience of the consumer. And I gotta tell you, people loved it. The fact that
you developed a following, so really in a relatively short amount of time from when you opened in 2012? Really, if you think about it, that was a pretty short amount of time to create that integrated experience, and wine and art come together. And we've talked about liquid art in a bottle, and you really ramped things up from there. How, from a business perspective, how do you decide? How does one decide on production levels and ramping up? So I know that generally speaking, wineries would like to have increase their production so that they can have economies of scale. But, do you monitor production? Do you stage it as your consumer numbers grow, and you do it in metrics with seeing the patterns? Or is it we will build it and they will come? Or are those, neither of those analogies kind of pertinent for this kind of question? Or is it really just basically grow as fast as you can on a production level?
Yeah, so I think everything was contrarian about Liquidity. Rather than just try and make as much wine as we could, we really looked at forecasting about what we could sell and at what price point. And one of the things I didn't want to do is I wanted to be priced not cheap, but not expensive. Something was competitive and that would work for what we saw as our demographic. And that was meaning that, this is again some years back, but they wanted to have, that bottle of wine, be it a Pinot Gris, that could be, $20 or under, just under, and also that we could have some better wines. But also knowing that if we were going to be building reserve wines, to do it properly, it was going to take a number of years. And so we knew at some point when the public was ready for it and we were ready for it, and we had the quality down, everything else started to win the awards, then we could start sharing reserve wines and start, for those particular wines, charging a little bit more. But I did not focus, and we can all talk about a couple of folks who got into it and started, right out of the chute with 30,000 cases. That wasn't really what I wanted for Liquidity, because unlike some precious stuff you have in your cellar, having a warehouse full of wine doesn't always mean it's going to go up in value. And it means you have to start discounting it. And when you start discounting wine, you've just discounted your brand. And so I'm a big believer in never giving away your product, because you're hurting your brand. And so it was always a case of, what can we make that's going to be really good, and at what volume do we think we can sell within this parameters of the kind of wines that we want to make, and that was it. And in fact, what it means, honestly, is you're losing money. For those first couple of years, you can either lose money by producing a whole bunch of wine and not selling it, or selling it at a big discount, or you make the wine that you can sell, and therefore you meet the needs of the market. And that's it. And and that will grow as people like it, share it with other people. So it has to be more organic. So we really wanted to sell on site through the tasting room and through the restaurant and then through the wine club. We set our goal as 75% of all of our wine production would come through the facility, and 25% would be placed strategically in the best boutique wine stores and the best restaurants, just to kind of have the brand on the menu. Mm-hmm. And that was how we did. Again, those first few years, we just made what we knew we could sell, which wasn't a lot, like 1,000 cases, and then 1,500 cases, and then 2,000 cases.
So slow organic growth. And interesting. I mean, the topic of allocation, we could spend just a year on that, particularly in the last couple of years after, during the COVID lockdown and coming through the pandemic and increases of all kind of chains of distribution. But I know that for all winery businesses, that allocation, making decisions as to your channels, that is a metric too about your own business, and, where, how that affects your margins, but also that is part of your marketing. Just quickly, you touched on pricing. I know that this is intertwined with production, or thank you, because the way that you were weaving those together. And maybe this is just another way of looking at the question I just asked, but on pricing, some people have this view of, well, don't start too high because you can't ratchet your prices down. And maybe that's separate than, or what you were saying about discounting, or don't start too low because that will take away from a premium brand one is trying to evoke. Is your approach similar in the winery space? Was that similar to how you will have seen pricing for other types of products in other sectors? Or do you really think this is a kind of a term of art here?
Yeah, the wine industry is pretty difficult. You kind of get the spread, from $9.95 to $150, throughout the Okanagan Valley, or you've got from all over the place. And I think you have to kind of pick your market where you want to be. And I really thought that our consumer, which, it's going to be majority is female, educated professionals, and the rest, same thing, men. But women, I feel, in most cases, are largely making these decisions. And so you have to have a property that's the setting, that appeals to everybody, and it feels really comfortable. And, if you walk into a room and you can smell the food and see the view and experience the art, and you just warm up to the whole thing, and then try the wines. And in many cases, if a wine didn't meet our standards, we dumped it. A lot of people just sell it. And I just said, absolutely not. We will never sell a wine that doesn't meet our excellent standards. And it can happen. Something goes off and you say, well, we can fix it. We'll just put some stuff in here. I said, no, dump it. We're not selling it. And so we really, really were stringent about the quality of what we were serving. And then making sure that the price points were approachable. And, I think, it's nice to have something at $20 so everybody can have something, out of their wallet. Nowadays, it's harder to do that. But this was, going back 10 years ago. And then we built it up. And we, I spent a lot of time in the tasting room and got to sort of see people's reaction to the price points and where you could start to move it from. You were never going to be able to bring your price down. That was never the case, but we could always bring it up. And so if you were selling out, getting a lot of demand for a product, winning lots of awards and recognition, people were loving it, then we knew that in the next year we could ratchet that price up a couple of dollars, and we were still going to be in the zone for people. And even when we got into our reserve wines, our premium wines, we made sure that they were sensibly priced. That world's best Chardonnay was $42.
Yeah.
You know,
Amazing value for that. Having had that wine and loved that wine, fantastic value.
Mhm.
And you make a good point, because I remember, many times visiting the tasting room or buying wine online and seeing the range in your portfolio on the pricing. And there really is something for everyone on the pricing point. And although you focused on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, there were some other grape varieties that you made and were expressed beautifully as well. So back to your point about consistency and quality across a portfolio, which is also important. So all of this value that you had created in many, many ways, and a premium offering, and a priceless destination to visit from the consumer, I know, not from the owner's point of view. You not only developed a following of consumers and journalists and wine lovers, but fellow winery owners. So, the dream scenario for business founders is when the value they've created is coveted by another market player, and that player comes and buys your business. And this happened with Liquidity. It changed hands and joined the Iconic Wineries group in early 2020, I recall, or I believe. And for those who are familiar with British Columbia wines, that group includes places like Mission Hill Family Estate, Cedar Creek, Checkmate, Martin's Lane. Each of them showcase outstanding visitor locations and experiences, really world-class as well. So they are in great company with Liquidity. So now that some time has passed since Liquidity has changed hands, and you're still in the Okanagan Valley, I'm looking from altitude. If you were to do it again, what or how would you do differently, in terms of cautionary tales for some, newbies looking to dive into the wine industry like you did, or perhaps it's some of your fellow winery owner colleagues who are considering expanding, or maybe they need to modify their portfolio offerings, or in these really challenging times, just look at sustainability and survival. So I know that's a really broad question, but maybe there are one or two in particular that you might want to share.
Yeah, I think, I don't think my story would be much different than anybody getting into the business today. I was ignorant about the whole wine industry, and I brought certain skills to it, but farming wasn't one of them. And you really have to know and understand farming to do well in this business. And you have to understand just the metrics of this market of selling alcohol. It's a very, very different business, very challenging business, and extremely overregulated. And so, as I say, everybody's passionate about wine, and at some point in time they want to get into it. But I would ask any of them to call me before they jump into this thing. It's and I do give people a lot of advice that are starting into it, and I try and say, look, if you are looking at this as a big profit source for you, please don't do this. If you're looking at something that you'd have enjoyment with, have a lot of fun, and don't mind burning up millions and millions of dollars while you're doing it, great. But approach it from the right point of view, because if you're thinking it's just what's going to pay the rent, it's always been a very tight margin business, and those margins are even tighter today. Cost of land has gone up, cost of glass has doubled, cost of labor's gone up, cost of everything in this business has gone up dramatically from when I started in it. And yet you can't really move the price of the wine up any higher than it already is. Mm-hmm. If you look at it now from the surveys from the Liquor Board here in BC, the sales of VQA, which is, British Columbia grown and made wines, are down substantially year over year. And part of it is that people are drinking a little bit less. And part of it is because our prices have hit the ceiling, of what the average consumer is willing to pay for them. So I think you want to go into this thing with your eyes wide open, and realizing if you just want to have some fun and burn some money and have a good time, it's great. Look behind the passion at the nuts and bolts and the digging into the granular as to what it really looks like in terms of the economic metrics of it. And I think the other thing I found too is that people are reluctant sometimes to hire the right professionals. You really have to have a good quality winemaker. If you think you're going to make this stuff yourself, you're crazy. You need somebody with wonderful experience. Like Allison, our winemaker, brilliant, and you've got to have that person on your team. You've got to have somebody who's really solid in viticulture. As you well know, that the weather here will change every year, and you have to be on top of things to keep your vines healthy and producing. And then a big part of it that people overlook is you've got to know your costing and do your financials. Really, really behind on that in a lot of the wineries here. And you can't do that in this day and age with the cost of borrowing and everything that's going on. You really have to be studying the numbers. I love the business, and I think it's a wonderful thing to be in. But it is a big expense, and I don't know that it's going to change for a while yet. But still, I'm looking out my window here. And I still live in the Okanagan Valley because this is one of the most beautiful places in the world, and still makes great wines, and there's great people, great things to do. It's a wonderful tourism destination. But just be careful and think it through. You've got to make sure that you've got the right piece of land, that you're growing the right varietals that the market is looking for, and that it will work well on your property. You've got to have really good sales force, really good team on the ground as well for yourself, and you've got to create a destination of interest. I look around where I live here, and there's people's idea of a destination is wine tasting, and if you're lucky, you can buy a slice of pizza. But that's not elevating your brand. It's not elevating the experience of the customer who's coming. So I don't know that they'll recommend it to all their friends, or that they'll be coming back every. So it's putting that extra effort in. Like, what is it that would really get you excited? What is it you really dream of, really want? Then you need to create and make that experience real for your customers. Make it happen.
So maybe one of your future projects is writing Ian's handbook. That was just a great one. So you touched on a lot of things that, come up in a lot of the discussions I have with people about wine. And back to the basics, which you said is you can't have good wine without good grapes and good farming. And in British Columbia, we have a long tradition of agriculture. The winery industry is relatively a newcomer. We have faced acute weather patterns, climate conditions. It's had horrific and devastating effects for our most recent vintage, for a lot of our growers here. It's challenging times, but despite that, and despite the fact that it seems wine consumption is generally decreasing in the world, including in France, there are always going to be wine lovers. There are always going to be people who love to travel in wine country. There are always going to be people who love to make wine, and it's more than just a liquid. So maybe you've already answered my question in your last response, which is, where do you think things could look like in British Columbia in our industry in, say, 10 years? Or what's the potential that we could strive for in the context of these challenges? Maybe it's what you said, which is creating a destination. Not everyone is going to have 35 or 40 acres. Some will have more, some will have less. But what do you think this could look like in 10 years for us?
Well, I wish I had the answer for that. I have some opinions on it, but I don't know I have an answer. I think that if even small wineries, I think if they focus on one or two things and do it really, really well, that the way the world communicates now through social media and other things, that if you're doing a great job of something, it'll get out there. Like, if you've got a little tiny shop and you're making the best cookie anybody's ever tasted, pretty soon everybody's going to find out about that cookie. And the same thing can be with wine. I know some wineries that serve, 22 to 30 different bottles of wine. I mean, I don't know it's like a smorgasbord, and I think it's really hard for a customer to get behind that. And so I would suggest that people find something that they can do and go narrow and deep, become recognized for what you're doing, really focus on that, really tell that story, really build that brand around it, and build that trust with your consumer. Because we're having to charge more for our wine here because of all the things I explained earlier. And so you really have to have the customer trust you that you're going to be doing a great job year over year, despite what's going on around here, in delivering a fantastic product for them that they're willing to pay that money for. And that when they come to you, hopefully to visit now and again, that you've created a really warm, engaging experience, that you've got really talented people, behind the tasting room bar, and that they have, where as much as possible, that these people have access to either an owner or a winemaker or something like that, because that really elevates their experience. They really feel that they've got a contact point with the people that are responsible for the day-to-day operations of this business, which you don't get in many businesses anymore. And if you can that, it really is a unique, heartwarming kind of experience that people want. And or look around, like travel, see what's happening in other regions. What are the wineries that are in those regions are really blowing things up because of what they're doing? Take those ideas and bring them home.
Yeah.
So
that's consistent perhaps with general consumer sentiment now and patterns and behaviors, which is less is more. People are apparently drinking less wine. Some of it's conscious consumerism. Some of it is they're exploring other types of beverages. Sometimes they want to have more quality and less volume. So maybe that's the way the world is going, no matter what your product, going back to being artisanal and creating a great brand and creating a great product and not trying to make too much of too many things. So on that note, I think, we could go on for hours, I know, but I think we'll leave it there for today. Ian, I'd like to thank you so much for joining today, and also for your massive contribution to our industry and to building and creating that space and helping to put our region on the global wine map. And I know, although you're no longer with Liquidity, I know that you provide support in many ways to people in the industry, at least by moral support, and that you're involved in a lot of other initiatives. So thank you for your passion for our province and for your support of others looking to launch their own businesses. So thanks for joining today.
Thanks, Tania. It's been great. Look forward to talking again soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Ian. Thank you for joining me on my TT Wine Explorer podcast today. Stay tuned for the next episode. You can follow me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Until then, remember to keep tasting, learning, and living.